Greetings, everybody. You can tell I'm still getting used to Zoom, even after this crazy year. Welcome back to PhotoAlliance. I have been missing our community so much in this year, and so happy we can start it, a gathering at least this way. If 2020 and 2021 is a dark cloud, we at least have the silver lining. So this is the first of our international lecture series. And the advantage of using Zoom or whatever platform we're on, it is Zoom, yeah, is we could be global. So here we are, we have people from the frozen forests of Finland to the macadamia nut farms of Hawaii. We are really in all time zones, and this is really wonderful. Amak Mahmoodian will be our first speaker. I'll tell you a bit more about her in just a minute, but I'd like to tell you the rest of our planned, scheduled spring international lecture series. Our second speaker will be Joan Foncomberta, who many of you, I hope, know his rather fabulous and inventive work. He'll be beaming in to us from Spain, and that will be March 13th. All of this will be on the PhotoAlliance website, or hopefully now if we have your emails and stuff, we can send you announcements. I don't know how that works. Then on April, no, I didn't write it down. April 10th, I'm looking on my calendar just to make sure. March, okay, one is March 13th. April, Ruth Van Beek, that's April 10th. And then the next month is May, coming up. May, we're going to have a double header. We're going to do something like we often do in the lecture hall, which I know many of you know, which is to have an introductory speaker and then another speaker. And both of them will be coming to us from, they'll have to get up very early in the morning, but they're coming to us from Japan. That will be Yasu Matsumoto and Kozu Miyoishi. Oh God. Yes, you'll see it on our thing. I'm sorry, Kozo. I'm terrible at reading. That will be I'm losing it. May 8th. I would like to thank the San Francisco Art Institute for helping us promote this this series and being an affiliate with PhotoAlliance for many years. And I'm glad their students can join us today, and they have generously allowed us to use their expanded Zoom platform. As part of that, I'd like to personally thank Christopher Pollock, who is the Prince of AV and has helped us through all the technical issues of doing this and is with us today to work out any glitches except for my speaking. I should tell you that this lecture is recorded. We're not exactly sure if we're going to have that online at some point, but it will be recorded, so just know that. I'd also like to give a shout out to the newly founded SF Artists Alumni, which is recently founded to connect the San Francisco Art Institute alumni, but globally. And so they've sent out an announcement about this lecture, and we thank them very much. I'd also like to announce that Heather Snyder, who is helping to facilitate this today, has joined the PhotoAlliance team. And I would like to thank her organizational skills. They have been just wonderful. And Lucian Liu, who is helping us behind the scenes today as well. Also, we will have question and answers. You need to type those in wherever they tell you to do that. And Heather is going to be the hostess with those. And I think we might have some that can go live. So, but I don't know how. That'll come at the end. Okay. I first met Amak Mahmoodian in Norway, which seemed an unlikely place, but Nordic Light is a photo conference that they have there and brought people from all over the place. And from the moment I met her, I think the moment anybody meets her, you realize that here is an amazingly bright and open and enthusiastic spirit. Her photography was interesting, her warmth and just connectivity was palpable. So I decided sort of then and there during those few days that I would try to get her to come and be part of our lecture series at for PhotoAlliance. But it was during the Trump administration. And even an Iranian living in London for 10 years had difficulty getting a travel visa. So we're very happy those days are behind us, but in the meantime, we're getting her here by Zoom. Now, Amak was born in Shiraz, Iran. She currently lives in Bristol, England. She earned her PhD from the University of New South Wales. That's in Australia. She earned her PhD from the University of South Wales. And her MA and BA were from the Art University in Tehran. And throughout her career, Mahmoodian has been focused on the stories of women across cultures and generations. She's going to tell you about her artist books. Oh, that was another thing I wanted to mention. I would say everybody in this lecture series is involved with book arts and photo book arts in some way or fashion. So that's going to be a sort of underlying theme that we will have during this series. Now, Amak is a photographer, a book artist, scholar, mother, archivist, poet, historian, feminist, teacher, a weaver of stories and time. She's also inspired me in thinking about her work in these last few days to just yearn to be back in the classroom when I can pull slides together and discuss more deeply the photo historical implications of what she'll be sharing with you today. So without further ado, please welcome my dear friend, Amak Mahmoodian.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much, Linda. It means a lot. Thank you for the beautiful introduction. It's an honor for me to know you. And hi, everyone. Salam, if we have any Persian person here. Lovely to see already 85 people had joined us here. Salam Minusjan. And thanks for organizing tonight's talk. Thank you for the invitation, Heather, Linda, Chris, and Lucian, for all your great help. And I'm going to share my screen now with you to start talk. Today, I think about things that I forgot to remember. I remind myself to remember. If I am afraid of the life I have created in the photographs, it's because of my dreams. I dream, I remember. With no family but memory. With no land but traces. My land travels within me. I live in the past. We all carry our memories with us, within us. Memory of the first day at school, meeting our first friends, buying a great book, going to cinema with family, anything, falling in love, and some remember home, family, exile. These are all memories. They belong to us. And when they fade, we rely on ourselves to recreate them, to tell, to share. And sometimes they are photographs. They are photographs to apprise us of what has happened in the past and what exists in the present. In the place and time when past and present meet, they marry to create a new narrative, which is the narrative of life, narrative of resistance. Tonight, I have decided not to start this conversation and this presentation with Zanjir. Instead, I like to begin with Shanasname. Shanasname was published as my very first book, the project which became a publicity and publication as a book in 2016 by RRB Books and IC Visual Lab in Bristol. Shanasname is the name of the official Iranian birth certificate. It is valid for life. But the photograph which it contains must be updated according to the standards. 11 years ago, I was waiting in a reception room, holding the birth certificate of my mother and myself. My eyes began to flick from the picture of my mother to the picture of myself and back again. A sudden realization came upon me of what these pictures meant. What do they show? And what they didn't show. My mother and I, for all our differences, were welded into one being. I looked like her, and she looked like me. All of a sudden, I realized that all of us, the people who I knew around me, they were being restricted to look the same for us and for others. That same day, the fingerprint of my mother and fingerprint of me was fixed next to our images. And though the faces had become so similar, the fingerprints were very different. And it was a really beautiful moment of discovery for me, that very small part of our being, a fingerprint, which is very huge part of our identity, could show how different we are from each other. And that fingerprint, it cannot be changed. It cannot be restricted to any change by any regime, any society, any religion. Nothing would change it until one die. Shanasname tells us both the story of the women who feature in the book and also the ways in which photography functions in official, personal, and social level. As I mentioned, in 2016, Shanasname was published, and the publication, the book became enormously successful, which I appreciate, I am grateful about. But obviously, because of the subject, although it was a deeply personal story, which I understand it pertained to a wider social issue in Middle East and in my country, it was partly, and in various occasions, it was misread, this project. And it became extremely political. Everything is political, what we do, what we read, what we watch, how we talk, and art is political. I don't want to deny that. But sometimes the politics and the way they can be translated, it could affect your life. And it did affect my life. After publication of Shanasname, I was advised to wait and to be careful of going back home and visiting my family. And as Linda mentioned, I see myself these days mostly as a mother and responsible for my son. So I decided to wait and be careful about what I say, what I create, what I work with. But after a few years, I realized I have to wait, but I don't want to be careful anymore because I have this opportunity to become the speaker of people who are not voiceless, but they are silenced sometimes. And after Shanasname and not going home, it started the journey to Zanjir. I should give you some introduction about my relation and the relation which I had built with photographs and the reasons behind that. As Linda mentioned, I was born in Shiraz, Iran in 1980 after revolution. And also at the same time of the war between Iran and Iraq, which it lasted for 8 years. And in my generation and the people who were the same age as me, we all remember those days of uncertainty about where was the safe place and what would happen to our family. So revolution and war, it did affect the country. And also, it was a revolution which had happened and it did affect the families, including my family. And it did cause some separation between families. Unfortunately, some family members, they had to leave the country for many different reasons. And many of my family members, they left. And because of the relation I had with my father and everything, I started to have conversation and find the reality, which it was at least my reality within the photographs. I began to think and to see the photographs as the evidence of being of my loved ones and having conversation with them. And this connection and this interest, it stayed with me for years, and we did grow together. And later on, I decided to study photography at Art University of Tehran. I said I decided. It was more than a decision because I had to have the exam, and I was lucky enough to pass the exam. And I went to the university, and I was extremely lucky to meet the beautiful people around me who I had chance to talk to. People, teachers, and inspirations such as Bahman Jalali, Nilufar Maref, Mehran and Mohajer. They were great teachers to me and to many other students. But I had many tutorials and many lessons with Bahman Jalali, and he was aware of my interest in archival photographs and family albums. So he suggested me, Bahman Jalali had a great project himself about Gajar and archival materials. And after having a chat with him in his office, he suggested me to visit Golestan Museum. Golestan Museum, the place of all archival materials which belong to 19th century in Iran. Golestan Museum in heart of Tehran once in 1848 and 18 to 1896 was the principal residence of King Gajar and his relatives. So I went to the museum to start this research, but at the same time, that feeling of stepping and going through the window and seeing the buildings and that mirror hall and all these wonderful places and feeling the soul of those people who were living there 136 years before me. It was quite special. I cannot even describe it, but it was amazing. And who was Nasser-ad-Din Shah? Nasser-ad-Din Shah is known as the first modern monarch of Iran. He started his kingdom in 1848, and he was the king till 1896. Unfortunately, as a king, his kingdom wasn't developed profoundly, but as an artist, many people, including myself, really respect his work. He was the first king in Iran to ask and to order a special wage for artists and his painters. And his interest with photography started from his interest in general art. He tried to paint. I found through my research some of his paintings, and it was interesting that most of the time he paint his subjects back to him as a painter because it required less details and it was easier for him. First time when he was photographed by a French photographer, he was 13-year-old, and he was absolutely amazed by the magic of camera and this magical box. So later on, he became the photographer for himself, and those struggles with the painting and drawing people was gone for him. That was the end. He started to photograph his kingdom, the life around him, for many different purposes, to show his power, to show his royal life, and also among his subjects in photographs, they were females of harem. They were his family, his wives, and daughters and relatives. They were approximately, according to one of the references, 800 females in harem, in Golestan harem, through his kingdom. And this intimacy of accepting to become the muse and the subject for his photographs was something more than the relationship between subject and photographer. It was because of the trust too. Those days, because of religious reasons, it was a taboo. Photographers, stranger photographers, they were not permitted, they didn't get permission to go to harem, to the private domain of these people to photograph them. So the king became the first family photographer of his own time, which was fascinating. And after seeing and going through these archival materials, of course, I was introduced to 76 different albums, and it was really helpful for me to talk to the team at Golestan Museum. And one of those ladies, Miss Taheri, she introduced me to these captions, were absolutely beautifully written by King, his handwriting at the bottom or the corner of photographs. And I was amazed of the seeing and knowing what was beyond these frames, what was beyond these faces who look absolutely trusted and happy to be photographed by the king, with these gifts from the king, and also the connections between these people and the handwriting and to whom these faces belong. So I started to estimate the number of these females and knowing them, and through the time I realized how different their life is through their own memories, handwritings and photos from the life which I heard and I read and I was taught at school through the history. That was the reason, and that was a huge invitation for me to expand my contextual research on this subject. And I started to go to the Tehran University Library, the main university of Tehran, because that is the place which they have, in which there is a place of archival handwriting. And I found the memories and handwriting of these people and the life which they went through, and their experience as royals and as the members of harem. What was interesting for me through this research, it was this contrast, the very strong contrast which was quite visible between their presentation and their image in public and in private domain in Qajar era. As you see here, right photograph is from the private domain inside the harem, and it's really different from the way these females looked outside, and that was the way I knew them before knowing the archive, and that was familiar to me. That was familiar for me as an Iranian girl who had different life inside and outside the house. I was interested, and those days it was the days which I convert my BA to MA, and I was interested in decentered identity and constructed identity, this identity which we were performing to be accepted by the society and not to be rejected. And these collective identities which we had, and switching from one to another one in public and in private. And that was similar to what I had seen through the archive. And that was the reason of inviting, one of the reasons of inviting the archival materials into my contemporary photographs, to work on this performative identity. Performative identity which was recovering and connecting the ties of past and present. These are performative, but at the same time they are documentary. I started to photograph people around me. These people were my present time. I started with my family. As a photographer, I never ever felt, I didn't feel like a photojournalist. I had those days to go with my small camera outside and take photographs. But for me, listening to people, knowing people and knowing how they feel in front of the camera has been always really important for me, and their connections, because camera is a tool to have conversation with the subjects. That is how I did feel. And it was really important for me to start with people who I knew and they were present in my life to explain the purposes and the reasons behind these photographs and this project. So I started with family, neighbors, friends of friends, and we have this performative identity and a stage documentary in their houses, in their private domain. I conceal the faces of present time behind the mask of the past, concealing and covering to reveal, to recover, to show the similarities and also to show the differences. And I work as a photo roman. It had a narrative through the story of sequencing of the photographs when I work on that project. And at the end, it was the purpose of this project to throw the mask away and have your pure own face without having any constructed image in front of the face. After a few years of taking the photographs in private places, at home and friend's house, I took the photographs outside. I just wanted to, I was in hope of conversation with public people and knowing their opinion and their understanding of their identity and this standard of presentation and constructed identity. So I went out with archives, and again, archival photographs became the cornerstone of this project due to the multiple potential of interpretation which these archival photographs had. And when I took these out, I was first worried about the reaction of public, and I was worried about the contrast of images in public and private. But then I realized how we react in front of the camera is quite performative, because we try to become someone who is better than us in front of the camera, better than us, and having that even self-censorship, become somebody who could be accepted through the image, and the image could be seen and is close to the ideology behind the photographs and creating the photographs. So it was really interesting to work in public places too with these people, and I work on these photographs and these project between 2004 and 2009 in Tehran and also in Karaj, these two cities mainly. And that was the time when I thought this project was closed, and that was the time when I moved to UK to continue studying my PhD. And I called that project Niqab at the beginning. Niqab in Persian means mask. And Niqab was about us, Iranian people, Iranian women. It was about our identity, our religion, and the image which was constructed for us, and the identity which was performed from us. And also, Niqab was about others and their perceptions from us and our lives, and their knowledge. And I was questioning that knowledge which sometimes needs to become closer, and it could become closer to the reality of people's life. But unfortunately, sometimes it is quite limited to what we see through the international channels or TVs or medias. So that was Niqab, and the work was closed, and it became one of the chapters of my research. In 2017, obviously time passed for a few years, and I didn't think about Niqab. I was working on different projects, including Shanasname and book. And in 2017, I had an offer from my publisher to work on the second project and second MOOC project together, which was really interesting, and it was amazing to hear that. And Rudy suggested me to work on Niqab, and he said, I have seen this project on your website, we can work on that, and what do you think? And I said, it should be very easy, because this project has been closed for years, and I was naively feeling quite confident that this process could be quite easy and simple. So I remember I came home and I asked my mother to send the rest of the negatives of this project from Iran to me. And after a while, I found myself here, in fact, in this room, surrounded by 3,000 negatives of time of 2004 and 2009, and thousands of memories within them. And I could go through the negatives. I remember I started to check them and take them at the window and see before scanning them. I remember those faces, I remember those days, but I couldn't pretty much remember to whom they belong. What was that day? Who was this person? Especially the public ones. So it was really moving, shocking, scary, touching. It was an absolutely mixture of so many different feeling for me. And I remember, because I am a really big fan of Marcel Proust and his writings, and I remember this quote from him then in the second book of In the Search of Lost Time. He says, the real voyage of discovery consists not in seeking new lands, but in seeing with new eyes. And that was what had happened to me. I was editing these photographs after 10 years of distance, 10 years of separation, and 10 years of desire of and hope of being home. And I remember this photograph. This is a photograph of my father and my mother behind the mask of the past, to find that connections and that ties with the past. And from that, I went to this, and this was one of the photographs which didn't make it to the edit of Neva, because I was thinking, okay, it might be not connected. But that was the moment which I realized these people, they don't need to conceal their face behind the mask of the past. They are already my past, and I witnessed how present can turn to past, and how anybody could become a mask and a memory, and how this mask could be carried by anyone. So these thoughts and this inner research, I can say, in these photographs created a new narrative in these photos and in this project, which was closer to my life, and in light of what's happening these days in the world, it's close to many our lives and many lives who are separated from their loved ones. So again, it is personal, but it's talking about something universal and common between us, which we share. So I work on this project. Obviously, I realized I cannot follow the project the way it was. And I was following the assertion, Roland Barthes assertions that says photography is more keen to magic than art. And it's that magical moment again of remembering and meeting. And also he says the photograph repeats what could never ever be repeated existentially. And that was what I was feeling, repeating that frozen time in the photographs and seeing what has been in my life, my family. But as I said, I couldn't find the string of the narrative anymore. But I remember this fantastic book. As I said at the beginning of the presentation, after a few months of research of archival albums, I was introduced to these diaries and memories, including diaries and memories of a Persian princess, Taj Sultaneh. And I remember what I remember from 2017 from this diary. Obviously, I was going through the archives and photographs and seeing image and going from one image to another one. And her memories and her diary. It doesn't contain any photograph, but it was strongly visual. I could see her room, I could see her mother, I could see, and that connection was really interesting. And in 2017, I went back to this photograph because I went back to this book because I thought it could connect me to the photographs and it would help me to find that lost and hidden and invisible narrative again. So, and I found her quotes, I read the book again and again, and I read about Taj Sultaneh and how she started her research in her family life and writing her memories 136 years before me. And I started wandering around my memories hundreds and years after her, but our feelings were common about family, lost, home, land. She was talking about her kingdom and I was talking about mine. And Taj Sultaneh, in fact, it means the crown of monarchy. And it was a royal title, her name. But she turned to be a very special and remarkable woman in her rights. She was a writer, she was an activist, and she was a painter. She could talk in 3 different languages. And knowing her, and she was continuously recording the life of royals. And she was able to do that because she was one of them, albeit a declining one. She was very different from the other ones. So I went through her book and I was wandering around my journey, the mythical journey of my memories among all those demigods, and Taj Sultaneh memories connected me to the narrative. So we decided to have this imagined conversation together. So I decided to have this imagined conversation with Taj Sultaneh. And because of their emotional, perhaps, and also because of all these contrasts which I could see, or the connections which I couldn't find here in the UK, I wasn't able to take photographs to complete this project and this story. But I decided to write my poems in response to her memories and her quotes. So we started this imagined conversation together with Taj. To anticipate death for myself will simplify it. But to anticipate it for whom I love make everything unpleasant. They die before they die. And I am scared of that. I know she is alive, as he is, but not for me, and not with me. When I talk to her, it feels like our last conversation, and tomorrow, and the day after, and the day after. We will never meet again. When these thoughts surround us, hold us, take us, they are dreams. I shot in my own body. You shot in yours. So this conversation it was quite joyful, and it was fine until the moment of silence. The moment which she didn't have any word to describe, and I didn't have any photograph to talk about my experience. And it was the moment of loss. It was the moment of losing our father's death. And we were looking for something. The only thing I found about that memory which she had when they took the body of father into the palace She was dyeing her hair, and obviously she was really shocked. She ran out, and she was also dyeing her eyebrows. And she saw the mother in this crowded corridor, and the mother said, was it the time for this now? And she slapped her. And Taja Sultana was 13 years old, and she was quite shocked. So she went and started to clean her eyebrows, and it didn't work. So she just shaved them and ran out. And I remember the night, the only thing I remember of the time when I had a phone call from Iran, and they said, okay, your dad, he's gone. I remember I just thought I need to go out. I went out, and it was the Halloween night, and see all these people with this appearance. It was a reminder of her experience of that crowd. So we were experiencing this battle, me and her, the battle of losing and accepting. And this battle was something which I was looking into the photographs, and I was looking into the images to find something in response to that. And I remember Shahnameh, which has been part of very beautiful part of my memory and my childhood. Shahnameh is the world's longest epic poem written by one poet. I'm sure many of you know that, by Ferdowsi. And it's a mythical, Shahnameh tells mostly mythical stories, but in some extent it's talking about historical events in Persian Empire before 7th century. And it's mostly talking about the battles between good and bad, goddess and evils, and these battles of dark and light. And I remember when I was working on this, I remembered the protection and the armor which my dad had for many reasons, which he had for himself. My dad's body was covered by these tattoos from Shahnameh. He had them when he was in France. And I didn't accept those tattoos because of the ideas and the acceptance of these appearance for people. When I was a child with tattoo, they were mostly criminals, and they didn't look like good people. And I was always questioning why my father should have these tattoos, but he did believe in that. And he had this dragon on his shoulder, which was related to one of the stories. And later on, maybe right now, and when he passed away, I thought these are the traces on his body which will remain even, and it became part of his being, and it was part of his identity. And it was really interesting that it was his armor, and it was protecting him as a person in his own thoughts. So I decided to talk about this battle of accepting and having something being written under your skin with ink, to bring the moment of death and accepting the death into the world. And I knew, and as I said, I was always, and I am following the assertions by Roland Barthes, that the photographs doesn't necessarily say what is no longer, but only and for certain what has been. And looking for something which has been. The project came together with it became the a structure, and it was constructed by archival materials, my own photographs and poems, and experts from Taja Sultana writing. And Zanjir started to have this circular narrative which was referencing the time of past and present. I always see you in my dreams, mother and father. I dream of home, where we could see each other. I would hide my face in you, and nobody would ever know me anymore. Thank you very much for listening. was it.
Hi, Amak. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you and see you.
Hi, everyone. My name is Heather Snyder, and I will be moderating a Q&A session now for anyone who wants to stay on. And first of all, Amak, thank you so much. That was wonderful guide through your work. And I feel like you enveloped us all in so much of the poetry of your work throughout this talk. Wonderful and much appreciated. And so exciting to be able to be in this conversation with you across 8 time zones, an entire continent and an entire ocean. So these are the silver linings that Linda mentioned of the pandemic, that we can be together and have this discussion. So I have a few people who have put some questions into the QA, but for any of you who are still out there, please feel free to go ahead and post any questions you have. I will pull them up and bring them up to Amak. Also at the end, Christopher will help us if anybody would like to actually speak live, we'll transition into that mode as well. So the first question I have is from Nina, and she asks, has the pandemic shutdown affected your thoughts about private versus public identity and its performance? For example, a Zoom meeting is a kind of a performance that brings the private space into a public light, not to mention all the time we've had to spend by ourselves and wondering when we will be together again with others and who we will be in that context.
That's a really interesting question, Nina. Thanks. Pandemic has been different. It has been a different experience and quite different from the familiar experiences which we had in our lives. So, and I think, yes, sometimes it is really hard because we are performing and that performance, but in the other hand, when I am talking about performing, I think we perform all our life because of the roles which we have. And this is something which I don't say from myself, that is something which has been at the end of 19th century has been told by thinkers and writers and philosophers about these different eyes. For example, it has been mentioned by Hegel and Horkheimer many times, and they talk about different eyes which we carry, and we switch from one to the other one because we want to be accepted and not to be rejected from the society and from the people who are around us. So that performing has been part of our life, Nina, I think, despite even the pandemic time. But through the pandemic time, I think these isolating moments of facing and talking, even right now, what I found interesting of my experience of talking to you tonight through the Zoom is just this mirroring and seeing self and performing for yourself. And I found it quite sometimes it could be interesting because it's a challenge which can be quite productive and it can create something different eyes and different egos. So I am experiencing this isolation, and I totally understand. But I found these private moments which we want to share, we can decide, and they are quite collective. They are collective identities which we collect in our daily life and try to share it with our audiences through the Zoom, for example, here right tonight, the place which we sit, the way we dress, with the way we talk together. So it is mostly concentrating and focused on collective identities again.
Thank you. So I have another one from Adash, and he writes that he was fascinated by the story and your perspective on the king and how he photographed the family. And his question is, if you think about that we are living from a shift from analog to digital archives, and how this might affect the future of how we relate and have access to family photographs?
Digitizing and activating the archive, Arash, it could become quite helpful and useful in a way in terms of working with communities and knowing about different communities and different families and taking something back to them. For example, I'm just thinking about if we had this chance, for example, there are many albums in Golestan Museum, and I hope and I am sure they are protected and they are fine, but there were few stories around that even few months ago, which you might know, Arash. But digitizing them, it would make them accessible for others and sharing and learning and telling their stories. And I think in future, if we would be able to do such a thing, it would be quite in terms of research, academic research, or even personal research. And as I said, connections, it could become quite useful in my opinion.
Mhm. Great, thank you very much. We have Sarah who wrote in with more of a photographic technical question, and she notes that you use multiple exposures often in your work, and can you talk a bit about how this process fits into your practice?
Yes, Sarah, that's a really good question. I use long exposures, and that is the time because photographs freeze and capture the time and that moment. So by using long exposure, I wanted to focus what was something which was beyond that frame for me, and that was the passage of time. That passage of time which could be seen, could be frozen and captured in one frame of photographs. That's why I use them a lot, Sarah.
Okay, I have one more question coming from Rob. And he asks, well, he says, you mentioned self-editing that you experienced after the release of Shanashame, I think. Yes. And does this concern you in your work today?
Self-editing, what do you mean by self-editing, Rob? Editing the work or self-editing?
I think, I'm not sure.
Self-censorship.
I think he's talking about kind of the politics that emerged when you released that work.
Mm-hmm. Because I was talking about self-censorship.
Oh, self-censorship.
To the work, and it's just about I can say at the beginning of the journey and at the beginning of the work, yes, I was considering that because I was perhaps I was more optimistic and I was thinking about the ways and the opportunities to keep that connections. But right now, I'm just thinking more responsible about talking behalf of my people and become the speakers and become their voice rather than thinking and considering self-censorship more and more for myself. So, of course, it can affect my work in various ways. It can affect the way I want my work to be seen and to be read. As I said, there are possibilities for the work to be misread because of the way and because of the knowledge which we have about these certain regimes, these certain geographic places such as Iran. So I have a knowledge about this and I know about this, but I think I'm not thinking about self-censorship anymore to my work, Rob. I hope it answered your question.
Okay, we have a couple more questions coming in, but I wanted to just stop for a moment to let everyone know that all the attendees of our lecture today will be receiving a follow-up email, and this will have information about how you can buy one of Amak's books. She's represented by RRB Photobooks, and we will also be including a discount code only for attendees that can be used for the purchase of one of her fine print editions that she also released with RRB, a photograph of her father. So just keep on the lookout for a follow-up email. We have a question from Kent who says, thank you for sharing such personal stories and feelings. What inspired your choice to use red for the photographs of your father's tattoos?
Kent, it was anger. I love my father tattoos and I love them right now. But when I was young, I was quite angry about his choice of having these tattoos. Obviously, he had them out of Iran, but at the same time, they were thoughts and they were some education which I had from my school, my friends, my religious teacher, and through the international TV to see. And I was that normalization of a self and who was a perfect man or perfect woman. And I was very young, I was perhaps 9 or 10, and always really angry and shy about my father's tattoos. I remember he had a tattoo on his hand, absolutely the same as mine. And when he was at school to pick me up, I ran to hold his hand here. Of course, I loved him, but mostly to hide that tattoo because I was thinking and asked him to wear long sleeves in front of my friends. So I had a project and it was about portraiting and capturing somebody who you like and you live with. And I decided to photograph the tattoos of my father, and I decided to use that filter because of that feeling which I needed to express through the photographs. And I did not have any idea how I would become in love with these photographs and how they are now big part of my memory and my life. So that was the reason. Okay.
Okay, we have another question coming from Minnie. She writes, I love Linda's introduction. How are you weaving stories in time? Can you talk about the time aspect in your work?
Time in my time and in my work, it is something which there is a transition in time. As I said, between past and present, and right now I am talking and working on a project which is talking about the future which is related to the past and present. And this weaving and bringing these together is sort of the manipulation in a positive way to bring in another aspect and to introduce another aspect of reality, which is the reality of the present time. So that weaving, it is in a way, for me, it had become a strategy to talk about the reality of present and familiar feelings and experiences of present in relation to past and future.
Okay, we have a question from Garav. Do you think that the move to digital, which makes photography essentially free and unlimited, changes photography from the limits of film with its cost for frames and etc.?
I think it's about what you want to say with your photographs. And for me, myself, I am an analog person. I love to work with my old camera. I love to change it, and maybe one day I will have one extra camera. But right now, I'm just thinking it depends what you want to say, what sort of a story. In photojournalism, for example, I am not professional and I don't have enough knowledge about that, but there are so many hidden and invisible stories. And obviously, for saying these stories and make them visible to others, to mass, it would be better to have that speed and that availability of being available all the time and take the pictures and send them out and share them. So I think these digital facilities and this digital technology could become really helpful for mass production and to making invisibles visible. by time. And still, analog would stay, I guess, powerful. And it depends what you want to say, why you are saying that. You will choose the technology and the method would suit you as a photographer, you as an artist and a storyteller, and the subject which you have selected to expand on.
Great, thank you. We'd like to open the webinar up to anyone who would consider asking their question live. And if you'd like to do that, we'd ask you to please click on the raise hand button at the bottom of the screen, and then we'll be able one by one to bring you into the conversation. And while we're waiting for that transition, let's see, I do have another question here, which is from Minouche asking, how is the issue of copyright regarding archival footage in Iran?
And that's a great question, Anush. When I went to the museum, obviously the director of the archives department, he was Mr. Hasti, Jawad Hasti. You might know, I don't know if you are familiar with those archives. So how was it with the copyright? When I work in the museum, because I did apply and my proposal went through, I was quite lucky. So I was, in a way, expanding my research on this archive, but I was giving back something and that research to the museum, although I was using them in my research, my own academic research too. So those days I was able to go to the archives and see the archives with a pencil and pen. And there were some books, they were in the library too, we were able to scan them and reproduce those photographs. But in terms of the original materials, if you were doing your bachelor or master or PhD, you were able to buy, I believe, 4 for BA, 6 for MA, and 9 for PhD of original photographs. And for me, after they expand, I started my work for 6 months, but then they asked me to work on few more albums, and they were thinking about if it would be possible for me to get some skills and knowledge about how to amend and how to work with archives. So we established a very great friendship with Golestan Museum's people, Anush. And because of that, instead of paying me after 2 years of work, I was able to buy 9 original photographs. And I had them. And when I say buying, they have their own camera at the museum and they will rephotograph it for me. And for the copyright, before publishing Zanjir in 2019, I did write to the museum and they did write a letter for me because, of course, I needed to have the copyright because Zanjir would be produced and it would be published. So I got the copyright and it has been mentioned at the end of the book.
Great.
I hope it answered the question. It's all right.
I think you did. It's very interesting. You know, these things work differently in across countries and across international boundaries, and you know, from the art world to the real world out there. It's just very interesting, all of those paths that artists have to navigate. So we have a couple more questions and then we'll be wrapping up. Again, if anyone wants to speak live, please go ahead and raise your hand. But in the meantime, I still have a few people typing in. And this question comes from Val, who asks, do you feel the difference between photographs which you hold in your hand versus seeing them on a screen, as in digital? And how does that change your reaction to the story?
It depends what I see in those photographs, but it depends. I think some photographs, I prefer to see them on a screen and have that distance with that photograph and create that physicality of touching the photographs in my imagination. I don't know, maybe it sounds a bit crazy. I don't know, but with some photographs, that physicality of touching them and treating them as remainers of something So again, it just depends on what you see and why you are looking at that. Is it some connection which you have with that photograph? Is a photograph of your grandmother, or is it some research about this? For example, NASA research about how to get to the another place and all those scientific research. So it depends for me. And I think again, it's come to usage of these facilities in the place and in the time, which could become absolutely valuable in terms of the reasons and the concept behind them and the reasons of using them.
Great, thank you. So we have one last question. This one comes from Irene. And she writes, most of the images you've shown are of family, often in their home, but there were a few landscapes. I was wondering how much you consider the land as part of identity. How much is the place something you hold on to regarding identity?
Identity, yes, finding myself in a place because I have my very warm memories of my childhood in Iranian desert. And it's a place I remember once I was there with my father, and it's in one of the poems of the book. And he told me, I'm like, look, this is the only place when you can see your shadow on the sky, because we had fire behind us. And that was something again, that finding yourself in the time when you were connected with that landscape. That was one of the reasons. But the main reason of using landscape in this work, because I wanted to make it universal. And this landscape, it could be anywhere. It could belong to any place. And it could belong to anybody's memories. And again, using the poems and using this landscape, the reason behind that is just to make it more universal, the message of that, and keep it as a whisper rather than a shout, because we are feeling naturally connected to nature, connected to earth, connected to our surrounding. And that was the reason of having them in my photographs and in my collections. I hope it answered your question.
I thought that was a wonderful answer, and I think we'll end it there. I loved what you said about a whisper or a shout. That's something that I can think about for a while. So thank you so much. So beautiful and so poetic. We're all really appreciative to learn more about you and your work, and we appreciate you staying up late to be with us.
Pleasure. Thanks.
Absolutely. And before I go, I just wanted to let those of you know who are still here, the next lecture in our series will be on March 13th with Joan Fontcuberta, and we're very excited to spend some time with him as well, and we hope you will join us again. So thank you again, Amak, thank you, Linda, and thank you to all of the staff who's been working with us behind the scenes to make today go smoothly.
Thank you very much, everyone, and thanks for joining.
Okay, good night.
Take care, bye.